last fall, actually when I became chair of the program, I quickly started to think about the idea of establishing a designer in residence program here at CCA in graphic design. And basically the idea was to invite a young interactive designer and interactive design instructor to come and embed themselves in our program for a semester, and to teach some, and to give a lecture, and to do a workshop, and just to find ways to bring their practice and their influences into our program. So I called a friend and former teacher named Dan Michelson, who is a designer based in New York City, who runs a studio called Linked by Air. And Dan, the very first person he mentioned was actually Laurel. He thought she would be an ideal candidate for this role, and I feel so fortunate that when I reached out to her with this somewhat harebrained idea, she immediately saw the potential of it and was excited to learn more, and then to come all the way from New York to here in San Francisco for 4 months or more to hang out with us. Just in case you don't know about Laurel's background, she has a BFA from the Rhode Island School of Design in graphic design, which she got in 2010. She, when she's not in San Francisco, lives in New York, where she's the owner of Beautiful Company and works as a designer and programmer at Linked by Air with Dan. Since 2012, she has been a lecturer in graphic design at the Yale School of Art, and she's interested in the intersection of art, nature, and the internet, and I think we'll hear more about those interests tonight. I will say that Laurel has many unique passions and interests, and I recommend you guys make her tell you about them if she doesn't talk about them tonight, two of which are concrete poetry and perfume. And one of my favorite of her projects is a fragrance review project called Perfume Area. So if you're looking to change your smell or explore a new one, she would be a great person to tap while she's out here. Anyway, please join me in welcoming Laurel.
Hi everyone. Can you all hear me back there? Okay. So thanks for coming. Just want to give a few thank yous. Obviously, thank you to Rachel for inviting me to CCA to be here as a visiting designer. It's a real honor to be here. Thanks to Vicky Del Rosario and Mike Boyce for helping me set up these flowers and a video camera. And then I also want to just thank again Linked by Air, even though they're not here. I've been working at that studio for the past 5 years, and basically learned all I know from them. So I genuinely couldn't be here without them. So anyway, welcome to the boardroom. So a couple weeks ago I was figuring out where to present, and Rachel and I were taking a tour around, and this was one of our stops. And the first thing I said to Rachel was, this room smells like the inside of the violin I used to play when I was growing up. So yeah, it's paneled in wood. And so this was just like a very kind of immediate connection, and it made me want to know more about the boardroom. So this is an image I found by Googling boardroom CCA, and this comes to us from Jensen Architects, their portfolio website. So I want to just tell you a little bit about the boardroom, things you might not already know. I noticed their descriptive paragraph below this image did a really good job of highlighting how this room is good for basically all the 5 senses. So sight, the table's curved design, it's a custom table, allows me to have like direct sight line with basically everyone. Maybe I have to be like in the center. Okay. And then hearing, again, the room shape echoes the table, so it improves the audio, the interior acoustics. And then the smell, so this wood is, I learned, is mahogany wood from Honduras, and mahogany is used as a tone wood in some stringed instruments, such as guitars. And then feeling, the architect said it should feel intimate, which I feel like it does. And then taste, I don't really know much about, but maybe I would look at this image and see that they supplied water bottles for everyone at the meeting. And I find the cup holders that hold the water bottles really fascinating and memorable, because they suggest that the room might be in motion, like a boat or something. So a couple clicks to the slideshow later, and I found this image. So the water bottles have swapped out for calla lilies. And so I don't know where the architects got this idea from, but I'm really glad that the flowers made me wonder what they were for, like what kind of event this could have been. But there's also a good chance that this image only existed for their portfolio. Maybe they bought all these lilies and staged it just to have like a beautiful kind of look to the space. And so if that's true, then maybe here tonight we're finally fulfilling the architect's dream of having 28 calla lilies in the room. So that's really exciting. So I would like to test the room's acoustics. So I'm going to play a little excerpt from a song. So that was a song, an excerpt of a song called East River Dawn from Laurie Spiegel's album The Expanding Universe from 1980. Laurie Spiegel is best known for composing with computers, where she would make her own software to generate music. And here she is pictured at Bell Labs, where she was a software developer in the 1970s. And here she is in 2012. She says this about imagination. Everybody is so bombarded and overloaded with media coming at us that we don't have the same access to our imaginations as we used to. Back when I made The Expanding Universe, I would go through my record collection and flip back and forth through my LPs. There was something I wanted to listen to that I couldn't quite put my finger on, something that would sustain and keep moving in a certain way, and I found that I didn't have anything like it. I could picture the sound in my mind, but I couldn't find it on a record. So I was led by my internal auditory imagination. There was a piece developing there, taking form, and it was something I wanted to hear. If I'd had a record with something like it, I would have just played that record, but instead I had to make it. So this is Georges Perec, a French author with his cat, and he was one of the members of this group called Oulipo, and Oulipo was a group of French writers and mathematicians, and they were really into basically making rules for themselves, so they could be more free in their creativity. And Oulipo is an acronym in French, and in English it roughly translates to the Workshop of Potential Literature. So for example, this book, Perec wrote a complete novel without using the letter E. So this is a book called The Void. He wrote this book called Life, a User's Manual that I actually read last summer. And it's all about all the occupants in a single apartment building in Paris. And when you open it up, you get this image, or map, or grid, and it is a map of the apartment building. And so you might be wondering how he uses constraints. And in this book, his constraints are quite complicated, but the one that is maybe the most accessible is called the Knights Tour. And I'm talking about a knight as in a board on a chess piece. So if you think about this grid as a 10 by 10 grid, it could be a chessboard. And a knight can move around the board in a way that it hits all the spaces. So he used that route to determine what would happen to what characters in which apartment. So those both are kind of intense undertakings. Another example of an Oulipian constraint would be the metro poem. So this was an idea that you could compose a poem while on the metro or on the subway. So maybe you guys could do this tonight if you're on BART. Basically, you get on the train, and when the train is in motion, you think of what the first line of your poem is going to be. And then once the train stops at the first stop, you write it down. And then the train goes in motion again, and you think about what your second line is, and once the train stops, you write it down, and so on. And so the poem is as long as how many stops are on your journey. And then once you arrive at your destination, you disembark and write down your final line on the platform. So I hope you guys can do this tonight. Please. Okay. So the members of the Oulipo group, and you can see Georges Perec in the center with the crazy hair, were really into the idea that rules didn't inhibit creativity but really allowed it. Some of them even believed that inspiration was a kind of slavery. Like, why wait for this thing that's so like whimsical and haphazard? So when I was a senior during my undergraduate at RISD, this is when I first started to get into the Oulipians and just think about what they were up to. And so I decided that I would take from their book and I would make myself some constraints. So I was heading into my final degree project, and I thought, oh, wouldn't it be great to just write myself a list of things to do, and then once the semester hits, I'll just do them. So I decided, since I was studying graphic design, I would focus on constraints, specifically in typeface design. So I made what I called a list of 14 to-dos, and I called them instructions for a typeface. So can you guys in the back see this? Okay. So I'll just let you guys read these. So some of them are practical, like I think the first two are practical, some personal, simple, morbid, maybe even dangerous. So I remember showing one of my friends in graphic design my rules, and she was like, I didn't even know you were into typefaces. And, and I don't know, I said I didn't either, but I just thought that typefaces were basically like a cool way to draw in graphic design. Like if you made your own typefaces, you could potentially have like the most control of how things formally look. And maybe you could extend even more authorship onto your work. So that's why I targeted them. So I was really excited with these typeface instructions. I basically thought that the whole semester would just be a test of my willpower and determination and self-discipline in creating these typefaces. But somehow when I sat down to make them, the results weren't as inspiring as I thought they would be. So what I ended up doing is just making a website for the instructions themselves and having that be the thing I made for this project. Anyway. So the artist Yoko Ono is known for making instructional pieces as well. This is her secret piece, and it says, decide on one note that you want to play it with the following accompaniment. The woods from 5 a.m. to 8 a.m. in summer, with the accompaniment of birds chirping at dawn. That's what the handwriting said. So in an interview between curator Hans-Ulrich Obreist and Yoko Ono, Obreist asks, there are some very interesting connections between your work and that of Olivier Messiaen, who studied ornithology and transcribed many bird songs. He said that birds are the greatest musicians on the planet. Can you tell me about translation? Ono replied, it struck me that one could not possibly make an exact translation of the birds singing, so that's where instructions came in. The instructional idea developed from realizing the limitations of our scoring and suggesting an alternative to normal Western classical music notations. So I thought that perhaps my typefaces had reached a similar fate. Just like there were limitations in musical notation, maybe there are also limitations in how typefaces were made. So again, I decided to leave my instructions as is because they were more interesting than what I had made. Earlier this year, Rhizome approached me to make an invitation for their annual benefit dinner. So Rhizome is a nonprofit in New York. They focus on new media art, and they're physically located out of the New Museum. So the dinner was going to be in early February of this year, and specifically they were going to honor two artists, Chen and Petra Courtright. And so the challenge for me as a designer was to make kind of like an identity for the event, to reference both of them but not to privilege one over the other. So one of the artists, Chen, is kind of unclassifiable. In addition to being an artist, he's an activist, writer, and publisher of the press Badlands Unlimited. The first time I heard about him was actually a little bit after my instructions for a typeface, when I went onto his website, which at the time was called nationalphilistine.com, and he had all these free fonts for download, and they were completely bizarre and strange, and they had like a bit of humor that was fascinating to me too. So his font project was called ultranumerics, which consisted of a handful of custom fonts, sometimes based around a person, and sometimes just a little experimental. And so Paul says, ultranumerics explores the intimate relationship between language and interactivity by transforming the simple computer font into an art form that explores the fissure between what we type and what we mean. So I'm just going to show you some of his fonts. So it's our test word. So this first font is called The Future Must Be Sweet. And the font reinterprets the philosopher Joseph Fournier's beliefs into a textual graphic notation. So you can see that when you get multiple lines, you kind of get a graph or a chart, a mind map. Okay. This next font is called Self-Portrait as a font. And Chen asked, what is it like to write like me? You don't even know me. Lowercase letters are phrases I say in conversation, and punctuations are incidental words I use to feign interest, confusion, or indifference. And this font is called Blurry But Not Blind. It's based on the French writer Mallarmé's interest in silence as a true universal language. So each character is a different amount of white space. This is another work by Chen called Oh, Why So Serious? And it's a keyboard whose keys are tiny plastic tombstones. And so in relation to the fonts, one might ask, what kind of thing would this type? Or what kind of language, and what would it look like? Chen also created a set of ink and collage works called Score for Seventh Light. They show his interest in a different type of language, that of music notation. And so if you look closely, you can see that the music notes are drawn maybe with ink, and then these other parts are collage paper that has like been torn. And you can kind of especially see it here. So the other artist honored at the dinner was Petra Courtright, and she's an artist who makes images, GIFs, videos, and internet art. And I think she's really good at taking effects that already exist and kind of bringing them to a new level through her treatment. So this is one of her webcam self-portrait videos that's called Holy Tears. And another one called Sick Hands. And if you go to Petra's website, it looks like this. And when you start to scroll down the page, it automatically starts taking you down, and you can't go back up. You see that the scroll bar is on the side. It's quite tiny. So in trying to find a relationship between Paul and Petra, something sparked in me when I saw this image that I found on Petra's Twitter account. And it's actually from a cell phone patent from a long time ago. And it says, "I am sorry for what happened," and then the user is trying to select the appropriate emoticon. So I couldn't help but notice that the elements of emoticons and some of the elements of musical notation overlapped. They're kind of like, if you break them up into parts, they kind of share some modular parts. So like a circle or a curved kind of parentheses. In music notation, that would be called a formatta. Yeah, and so this is a clipping from actually the first time that emoticons appeared in print, which was 1881 in a satirical magazine called Puck. And so for the first time they're showing joy, melancholy, indifference, and astonishment. And so if you were invited to the benefit, you would get this in your inbox. And so I had designed an overall identity, and this was like the main shape. And you could probably recognize that this is just a part of a music dot, or a music note. So if you extend the stem, it goes upwards. And so you could click on that big dot or ellipse, or there's a link down below, and you would get to this site. So I also designed some vinyl graphics for the actual physical space. And so it took place in the Sky Room, which is the top floor of the new museum. And so it has like a nice window overlook. So I mocked it up. Thought that the dot could be reflected on the floor. Another dot. And then I also suggested that they hire a cello player. So, but really, unfortunately, only some aspects of my vinyl design were taken, because this vinyl dot, I think, cost somewhere around $800. But I still really enjoy what I made, kind of just as drawings. So my decision to, for example, insert the bird sound was based on reason, but also partially based on intuition, maybe even more so based on intuition. And so sometimes when I make those decisions, it's exciting and thrilling, but also scary. And so, as was like the cello player, kind of an intuitive decision. And so months later, I was reading actually Paul Chan's book of his collected writings, when he said, "I write this on what is supposed to be the first day of spring. It is morning and I hear birds singing outside. Sparrows, robins, For no reason a theory comes to mind, or is it a story? It goes like this. In the beginning, language originated in song, and the world was made meaningful one note at a time. But there came a point when language split from song. Each went their separate ways afterward, touching at times but never fully embracing. And it was then, at the moment when music and speech became distinct from one another, that a new concept was born: tragedy. I remember one of the first pieces of internet art maybe I made started in this computer lab. Actually, this is a random computer lab. I couldn't find the computer lab that I did it in. But basically, again, I had a kind of like intuitive idea. And I'm not even sure it was for a project. I just thought it would be fascinating. I bought a steak from a grocery store, and I brought it into the computer lab, and I scanned it both sides at the highest possible setting. And so usually I don't care like how big files are, but then I decided to take one of the sides, one of these like huge JPEGs. Only afterwards I realized it was 800 megabytes, which is close to 1 gigabyte. I put it on my personal website. So if you went to laurelschwulst.com around November 2009, you would get a huge image of me, and it would kind of load very slowly. And some of my friends told me that it crashed their web browsers, and I thought that was really cool and powerful. But later, I collaborated with a friend who helped me make a hacked Google map. And so this was what I call Meat Map. So you could kind of zoom in and see the map in greater detail. I also kind of like that the default map pointer looks like an upside down droplet of blood. So taking another cue from the natural world, I started another project by tracing my rock collection in Illustrator. Then I made a font with it, taking a cue from Paul Chen. And so the larger rocks are the uppercase letters, the smaller rocks are the lowercase, and the numbers don't really have a system. But I actually didn't use the font in the final project. So I used rocks as symbols for this project called When All My Friends Are Online at Once. And it's a website, and when you go to it, every rock contains a memory from someone from their early internet life. And so it's kind of like an online anthology of the past internet. And I have a memory in there about my early life with horses online. But it took me a while to arrive at this, but I realized rocks were a really good symbol because each one was unique, and memories should be unique. So every person has a different rock. And so that was it on mobile in the rain. Here it is on desktop. One initial discussion I had with my collaborator, who is Jean McHugh, who's a writer and curator who curated this project, was what form should it take? He actually originally thought that it should be a PDF that people could download and just look at. And I kind of thought that it would get more buried that way, because I thought these memories were very accessible and should like live on the surface as possible, as much on the surface as possible. Yeah, and since they kind of remind me of almost like journal blog entries from a while ago, so I thought that a website would be most appropriate. it's also more easily shareable. So another project started with a collection, this time a collection of logos that are trees. And so maybe you recognize some of them. The one on the top left is Dollar Tree. There's the air freshener. Yeah. Then a little bit later, I learned that you could rotate vectors in Illustrator to create a kind of instant object effect, which was funny to me because the logos of trees were made by looking at real trees, I assume, and now we're making them back into objects. But anyway, something about this image felt compelling to me, and so I said, oh, maybe it will just become the cover of a book. So there it is. So my next task was to decide what would go in the book. And so somehow making the trees into little objects kind of made me think of them in a new way, kind of helped me imagine what their world would be like. So I decided that the trees were actually products, and you could buy a handful of them in a product that I call Logo Forest. So it would come in this box. When you buy Logo Forest, it starts small, it grows into your home. It kind of has the benefits of a real forest, but it's nice because it's small and it's still like, it's small and grows in your home, you don't have to go outside. And so these are some illustrations I created for the book. These are actually the expansion packs you can order. And maybe the trees grow really big. But a really important part of this project, probably more important than the illustrations, were these fake reviews I composed. So I'm just going to read these two. 4 stars, pretty okay forest. This forest doesn't have the flash or flare that some forests do. It's just a simple little forest that grows in your room and makes that pleasant rustling leaves noise. You don't have to worry with feeding the trees every day since they are pretty self-sufficient. Overall, I am very pleased with my purchase. And 3 stars, sublime but small. I received these trees as a Christmas gift, and so far they have been a pleasant diversion. I chose an ideal place for my little forest, in a hallway, where the sound of rustling leaves can be heard from 2 rooms. It is quite sublime. However, I must say that the trees are much smaller than I expected. Are they supposed to grow any bigger? Sure, they're cute and all, but they are a little small. If you're going to buy these, you should use a measuring tape for a reality check on how big these things actually are. It was important to me that this world of Logo Forest be somewhat believable. And so to create these reviews, I actually didn't do much writing at all. I decided I would impose a constraint upon myself, which was every review had to take from 2 sources. The first source was an Amazon review of a relaxation product such as a Zen garden or a fountain for your home or office. And the second constraint was just that each review had to take some part of one day of my Japan trip diary, just to kind of make it a little bit more exciting or adventurous. And so these are the first 2 reviews that appear in the book, but gradually I kind of felt like by merging the 2 texts, I was able to turn the knob up on the adventure if I wanted to, kind of near the end of the book. And so in some ways, I felt like I was using text kind of in a similar way a painter would use 2 colors to kind of make a new color. In some ways, it's also kind of like collage. So when I was growing up, I had this mirror. Maybe many of you have this mirror. Anyone? Great. Okay. It's from Ikea. It's a wavy mirror. I felt gravitated towards it because I kind of thought it was surprising. I don't know, it almost looked a little bit like a funhouse mirror, as if when you were to go in front of it, it might alter your image with its wave. So it's called the Crab. And I started maybe 3 years ago looking at a lot of Ikea how-to guides. I thought they were memorable for two reasons. One, because of the Swedish names that are often similar to English names that can be humorous, the translation. And then two, because of this figure, mascot guy, who's always happy and then confused and then happy again as he assembles a generic bookcase. He's never assembling what you ordered or bought, which is the crab mirror. So this image is from the Wikipedia page called Selfawareness. This is a dog doing the mirror test. A mirror test lets us know if the dog is self-aware or knows that the reflection is actually himself. So the only animals to have passed the mirror test are elephants, some primates, some dolphins and whales, and then one type of bird, the magpie. So in her writing, What is a Myth?, Karen Armstrong says, "We are meaning-seeking creatures. Dogs, as far as we know, do not agonize about the canine condition, worry about the plight of dogs in other parts of the world, or try to see their lives from a different perspective. But human beings fall easily into despair. Human beings are unique in retaining the capacity for play. Unless they are living in the artificial conditions of captivity, other animals lose their early sense of fun when they encounter the harsh realities of life in the wild. Human adults, however, continue to enjoy playing with different possibilities, and, like children, we go on creating imaginary worlds. In art, liberated from the constraints of reason and logic, we conceive and combine new forms that enrich our lives and which we believe tell us something important and profoundly true." This is an animation I created. Maybe I call it a moving collage based on what I was talking about earlier with Ikea. The filmmaker JeanLuc Godard said, "We must confront vague ideas with clear images." This is a still from one of his movies, Parole les Fous. I think maybe one of the most challenging decisions any visual person must make, however, is which clear image to use. I read this novella called Jealousy by the French author Robe Griez a few months ago. So on the first page, again, there's a map, like Life a User's Manual. But this map is of a banana plantation, where the story is set. And Robe Griez is really good at making these really precise, exact descriptions. So I'm just going to read to you from the first intro paragraph about how the light hits the house amongst the banana plantation. Now the shadow of the column which supports the southwest corner of the roof, divides the corresponding corner of the veranda into 2 equal parts. This veranda is a wide, covered gallery surrounding the house on 3 sides. Since its width is the same for the central portion as for the sides, the line of shadow cast by the column extends precisely to the corner of the house. But it stops there, for the only veranda flagstones are reached by the sun, which is still too high in the sky. The wooden walls of the house, that is, its front and west gable end, are still protected from the sun by the roof, common to the house proper and the terrace. So at this moment the shadow of the outer edge of the roof coincides exactly with the right angle formed by the terrace and the 2 vertical surfaces of the corner of the house. So as the story progresses, the level of detail ascribed to these inanimate objects or architecture is ascribed onto the 2 characters in the novel, which I think makes things really fascinating. So about 3 years ago, I started to get really into perfume. And it all started one weekend night. I believe it was raining, and I was inside, and I had just run out of my previous signature scent. So I was inside and surfing the internet and reading perfume reviews. And so eventually I read hundreds of reviews, but there was just this one perfume that I really gravitated towards. It was this one, called Sa Sent Beau by the brand Kenzo, which in French means the beautiful scent. I thought the packaging was beautiful. I love the color green. And it was also coincidentally first made the year I was born. So all of these signs seemed really good to me. And the reviews were really fascinating. People were really passionate. And so I bought this perfume for about $50 on eBay. But then when it arrived, I smelled it and it actually made me feel nauseous. So I talked to my friend and fellow artist Sidney Shen and told her about my experience and how I thought perfume reviews were kind of amazing because how passionate yet subjective they are. And so I remember I was over at her house and she showed me all of her perfume sample vials and we smelled them together. And she ordered them from Lucky Scent. These are actually my sample vials from last summer. But anyway, we agreed that we would start a project together, or we would just start writing perfume reviews. We kind of liked, again going back to Aleppo, the idea of a perfume being the constraint for maybe a short story. We wanted to write more, so it was a good excuse. So the first thing we made was a small beta issue of about 8 reviews, 4 by me and 4 by Sidney. It was interesting collaborating with her because we would just write independently, but then, so simultaneously, so we had this printed issue, but we also had a Tumblr, And we would just post and see what the other did. Authorship wasn't ascribed, so kind of naturally we bounced things off each other. And then later we did a reading of our Perfume Reviews on the radio in March 2014. And so I'm just going to read a few of the reviews now. Le Labo, Jasmine 17, 3 flowers. This national park is confusing. For example, the flowering trees never stop, and when they produce fruit, it's more like gear. And the mountains are tiny heaps of colored bits. You can tell because when you look closely at the ground, each stone is actually a tiny plastic eraser. And when you look to the sky, it's cuter than usual. And when it rains from the cute sky, Pez candy sprinkles down, resulting in a tiny bounce off the erasers. Le Labo, Lease 41, 5 flowers. Riding down Milk Road on a motorcycle, you feel free. Life-size tourists with their pet children hang out near shy fountains. 10 anonymous hymns for guitar begins, and the miracle light reflects off the land juice, blinding you slightly, but in a good way. Year after year drips down your face, and every time you check the time, it's spring. Comme des Garçons, Serpentine, 4 flowers. A glass knife rests in a grass field. Mechanical chirps softly construct a familiar melody. Silver reading glasses magnify a toad's rapid eye movement, asleep at noon. 2 full sets of house keys wait peacefully. A stiletto, after standing upright for hours, falls over in the breeze. 10 meters north of these relics, a translucent white container labeled Our Fault would be empty if, a few minutes prior, a dove had held its bladder while flying overhead. Issei Miyake, Le Oud de Issy, 2 flowers. In 1992, Issei Miyake released his own water scent. Issei's water promised to be light, refreshing, clean, and soft. Instead, the fragrance is quietly vile, more like fresh bottled sweat than water. It is a camouflage scent for an alien hoping to be detected as a real human body. And then I wrote a review for Helvetica the perfume. Do any of you know that perfume? It was made by a teacher at CCA. Okay. Helvetica the perfume, 2 flowers. Helvetica the perfume consists only of water. This is, apparently, the scent of nothing. You are excited to finally own a special container of distilled water. Through this, you focus on everything about the perfume except its fragrance. Although it has no smell, it works well as a placebo. You wear most perfumes to attract others, but as you wear Helvetica, only you are aware of its existence, a mirror that lets you reflect on your beauty, education, and cultural sensibilities. However, you notice the perfume is poorly titled. It is called Helvetica, a Swiss typeface that is far from neutral. Why not name it fondly after its 2-ounce container, allowing its contents, whatever they may be, to last beyond the death of the typeface? There are moments you find use for Helvetica. Sometimes you spray Helvetica on the rubber plant to simulate conditions of a human rainforest. Other times you use Helvetica to discipline your cat. Then in May, we published a book of 36 of the reviews. So it's basically all of the reviews up until now. So this is the front, this is the back. And this is a really interesting moment for me, I guess, as a designer, because I actually didn't design this book. I just helped write it, and I guess art directed a little bit. But that was really refreshing for me. And so that's what one of the reviews looks like. One, I guess, big question in designing the book was how is the book different than the reviews are already? Because the reviews are all online. How can we make the book kind of like its own thing? So it has, maybe I would say, like 3 defining features. And the first is this fold-out map. First page is a map. So it has locations like Milk Road, Cute Restaurant, New York City, Flower Shop, Ikea, Froyo Shop. And then when you open to the front page, it has a key for the flowers. 1 flower is memorable, 5 flowers is memorable. In the middle, it's forgettable. And then finally, we just divided all of the reviews into 4 sections: morning, afternoon, evening, and night. And so it's like maybe when you should use the perfume, but also kind of thinking about the reviews as a narrative. Then we had a launch party for the book at Print and Matter. So this was a poster I co-designed with the designer of the book, Bryce Wilner. We had a cello player, David Ertel, and got him a boutonniere. This says us reading. I like that we were able to use David's music stand. This was our score. We read 2 reviews from each time of day, and in between the times of day we would ring a bell. And that's it.